Hey there, Alex Kidman here, and this is the Nokia 3210. Let's get into the review. So it's not exactly a secret that HMD Global, that's the company that's owned the rights to produce Nokia branded phones for the past few years, has been shifting away from that Nokia branding for its own HMD branded phones, as we saw in the HMD Pulse Pro, for example. But it's still producing Nokia phones largely as feature phones. The Nokia 3210 is the latest of its retro throwback phones. So simple feature phones by and large, with a couple of key target markets that it wants to hit. Fun digression though, the original Nokia 3210 was actually the first mobile phone that I ever owned, and I owned it right up until the point that somebody decided to steal it out of my car while I was in hospital because my daughter was being born, because people are just awful like that. But that does point to the fact that the original Nokia 3210 was a highly desirable phone way back in the day. Is it still the case? Let's find out. There's only so many ways you can build one of these candy bar form factor phones, and way back in the day, Nokia tried its hand at most of those ways. The 3210 was a bit of a design classic, and the reimagined 3210 is a kind of take on the original 3210. It's not quite the same thing if you had one back in the day, but it's reminiscent enough, I suppose. The Nokia 3210 ships in three different colour choices. You've got the Scuba Blue, which I've got here. There's also Y2K Gold or Grunge Black. They're pretty clearly targeting the Gen X market with those colour names, but it's pleasant enough, it's decent enough, it's all plastic, it's all quite light, and you just get that colour around most of the phones, save for the white bezel around the screen. Well, the white bezel around the screen bezel, I should say. They're all perfectly fine and reasonable colours. Some stand out more than others. Obviously, the grunge black, I suppose, is what you'd go for if you wanted a no-fuss phone, but I'm a bit of a noted sucker for blue phones, so I do rather like this. In keeping with classic feature phone style, you've just got a small display screen. It's just 1.4 inches. Although its 320 by 240 resolution would have seemed magical back in the day. Really, high res for a feature phone, even though it's appallingly low res for a smartphone these days. Physical controls are in your classic T9 style layout, with a 5-way directional controller and selection and call buttons at the top. Nothing too surprising here, really. At the back, there's a simple camera lens, while the top houses a 3.5mm headphone jack, and the base has a USB-C charging port. All fairly simple stuff. The Nokia 3210 supports a removable battery, and I'm just going to quickly show how that's removable, because this, again, does come up quite frequently. This is actually an easier phone to get the back off than most, I find, and popping the back off reveals the battery, but also the dual SIM card slots. One of those can also take up to a 32GB memory card instead of a SIM card, if that's your preferred style. You could actually roll with the 3210 with the back off entirely, although I wouldn't if I were you. You're asking for trouble. You're asking for the battery to get bumped out and then your phone stops working entirely. But you could do it if you wanted to. On the camera front, so look, your classic feature phone had cameras which were technologically appropriate for the era they were in. We're talking late 90s, early 2000s here, where camera phone technology really wasn't that good, so the cameras weren't that good. And this is something that HMD has kind of stuck to. Not that it's got contemporary cameras, but that the cameras really aren't very good. And I say cameras, it's one camera. It's a single 2-megapixel module, and it's pretty awful. It's slow to start up. Its colours wash out. It's just frustrating to use, really. I mean, even if you want to get a selfie, as I've done here, you've got to either set the selfie timer, or you've got to just spray and pray by clicking the button while you're pointing the camera at yourself. It's not a good experience. It's not a good camera, period. And this has been the story for most of HMD's Nokia feature phones. Really, they've all had really pretty bad cameras. There's no reason to really think about the camera on this phone at all. And honestly, even if you did just want a phone as a phone, I'd probably get a smartphone to be my actual camera rather than this thing. What about video quality, I hear you ask? Well, yeah. I'm not sure that quality is the word that I'd use here. Essentially speaking, the camera here is a mess. So under the hood, the Nokia 3210 is running off a Unisoc T107 processor with 64 megabytes, that's megabytes, not gigabytes, 64 megabytes of RAM and 128 meg of storage, although nearly all of that storage is actually taken up by the pre-installed operating system and apps that are on here. I'll get into those in a minute, leaving you with about 10 meg of storage. It's not a whole lot. So you might want to think about using that secondary SIM card slot for microSD expansion if you wanted to have a whole lot of stuff on this phone. However, none of those specifications massively matter, not in real terms at all, because it's really about what you do with this phone. I mean, for a technical type like myself, it's interesting to note that one of the limitations of the T107 is that it can only support 2 megapixel camera modules. That's why the camera on this thing is so bad. But realistically, I think there's 2 target markets for this particular phone. Here is where I want to divert from my usual phone reviewing style, because I think this phone targets 2 different usage groups and I want to talk to them directly, because what you're looking for in a phone review is a little bit different. First of all, you've got the people who just want a phone. There's quite a few of you out there, and I'll address that. And then there's people who are looking for that digital detox kind of device, the phone that helps you get away from the doom scrolling kind of thing. And I'll talk about that after I've talked about how this acts as an actual phone, or as much as I can. So for a regular phone user, the Nokia 3210 does benefit from having a very familiar, very simple interface. It's very easy to get into calling and texting with this phone. They are front and center, the first things that you can do with this phone. One big benefit here of having a higher resolution screen, and a brighter one at that, is that it is fairly easy to see in most lights, and the iconography is fairly large if your eyesight ain't great. So you can see what you're texting or who you're calling, that kind of thing. All of that works fairly well. And obviously, if you were an old school Nokia user, you'd find it instantly comfortable and familiar. That's all good. Possibly not so good if you're looking for this as a phone is the fact that it's pretty lightweight, not super robust, but also the phone buttons are fairly small. So if you have digital dexterity issues, then you might find this a slightly challenging device to use on that basis. Now, I often get asked about call quality and call quality tests when I'm doing phone reviews. People complain about this quite a bit. And it's a really hard one to satisfy, and I want to explain why, not in too much detail, because I could go on about this for hours. Essentially speaking, there's 2 parts to mobile call quality. There's the quality of the handset itself, obviously, but then there's the quality of the network. And the results that I get off an Australian network, in this case it's Telstra in Sydney, might be completely different to what you might get off Optus in Melbourne, or off Vodafone in Wagga Wagga, or anywhere else on the planet. And that mobile network quality is something you don't have control over, so you can get a good result one day and a bad result the other day because the network's overloaded. It's why I generally shy away from talking about call quality too much. But I did test this with calls, and yes, it does work reasonably well. So for example, while I can't show you a call on this phone, I did use its voice recorder function to give you an idea of what its pickup of your voice might be like. Demonstrating voice call quality is always super difficult because it's so network dependent. But here, for example, is what its voice recorder picks up of my voice. And, well, yeah, I mean, you can judge that for yourself. Generally speaking, though, for calls, I've had no particular issues. For texts, it's fine within the limitations, obviously, that it's just using that T9 style texting thing, which is very old school to me, but might be perfectly fine for your needs if you just want simple yes-no responses or short stuff, or you don't text much. It's all fine. And look, while phoning and texting might be the core reason you might want this phone, there are a bunch of other apps and features on board. So, for example, within the extras menu, you get things like unit conversion and a simple calculator inbuilt. It also supports radio, if that's important to you, although it's advisable to plug in a set of wired headphones when you're doing so. That's not just a politeness thing, not blasting the radio at the rest of the world. It's actually to do with reception, because that cable becomes part of the antenna and you'll get improved reception that way. So that might be enough for you if all you want is just calling. But what if you're looking at it as a digital detox device? Well, look here, the Nokia 3210 might do the trick, but I think it does the trick by way of being annoying rather than being a really terribly capable digital detox device. And I need to unpack why that's so. Primarily, the features here are quite basic, as you'd expect out of a feature phone. For a lot of people, they're going to gravitate towards Snake, for example, and Snake is fine. It's what it's classically been ever since HMD reimagined it a few years ago. You do get a few other games on board, although about half of them are just trial versions. You get like 3 goes and then you have to buy them. One entertaining thing here is the way that you buy them. So Doodle Jump is on there, for example. Good old classic smartphone game Doodle Jump. And you can play that 3 times for nothing, that's fine. But then if you want it to buy it, you buy it with international SMSs. Literally, 10 international SMSs will buy you Doodle Jump, which of course means its price could be massively variable because that's going to come down to what your carrier charges you for an international SMS to where they're housing Doodle Jump. And look, spoiler, I didn't bother buying Doodle Jump. It didn't seem like it was going to be great value to me. You also get features like an internet browser built in, and you might think, well, that's okay for my digital detox. I might need to look something up, but it's using Opera Mini, and Opera Mini is fine for what it's doing and fine for what it's limited to do on a screen of this size, but wow, it's a frustrating experience trying to search for something or trying to open a URL, again, because of that T9 predictive text thing where you just have to enter it a character at a time and it's slow and it's awkward. And then once you actually get to the site, you've got to try and drill down to where you want to be and hope that the elements on screen are going to render in some kind of legible way. It's not great. And unless you were really in an emergency situation, I genuinely wouldn't bother. It's also kind of weird to me that Facebook is on this, and Facebook has been on some of the other HMD Nokia phones for sure, but it's weird to me that you've got this digital detox device that's got one of the things that you want to get a digital detox away from on the phone. Although again, the experience is so limited, I don't know why you'd bother. For whatever reason, this always comes up when I review one of these Nokia feature phones. People always say, oh, does it support WhatsApp? Does it support WhatsApp? Hey, is WhatsApp on board? No, not supported, not there. Not a feature of the Nokia 3210. One big caveat here, although I suppose it does assist in that digital detox story, is that the Nokia 3210, like a lot of Nokia's other feature phones, does not feature Wi-Fi in any way, shape or form. So the only data that's going to come into this phone is via your 4G connection. That's it. If you think, oh, well, I can put it onto Wi-Fi, I can save some of my digital data, nah, you can't. And that could be an issue, I suppose, actually, if you've got one of those limited number of POAG plans that charge you through the nose for data. If you're setting this up for someone who doesn't need data, but is on one of those plans, I'd disable data straight away. It's going to cost them a fortune. There's other weird, kind of annoying quirks here as well. So diving into the storage, for example, because I needed to transfer a few files and I need to get the photos off the phone, for example, I discovered there's an ebook folder, and I thought, well, that's an interesting idea, reading ebooks on a phone like this. I suppose not bad. Wouldn't have to take a Kindle with me if I was doing a digital detox weekend away, for example. But I don't exactly know why it's there, because it doesn't actually support most popular ebook formats. The only thing that I could actually get working on it were plain text files, and that ain't a great way to read an ebook, even within the limitations of this screen. And that's sort of the story of this as a digital detox device. Yes, you'll sort of detox, but you'll detox largely because using the additional functions of the phone just isn't that satisfying or even that simple. It's all kind of awkward. On the battery front, the Nokia 3210 runs off a 1450 milliamp hour battery, and as I've previously shown you, it's a removable one. And that's tiny by modern smartphone standards, but it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't really matter because this is a very simple phone. It's really not doing very much, and I suspect most users are not going to use it for very much. I've easily managed to sail through 5 days and more of battery usage while testing this phone, and that's because there's only so much you can do with it. Most of the time, probably the most battery-intensive thing it's likely to be doing is just looking for mobile phone towers because it's trying to act like a mobile phone. There's no Wi-Fi on board to sap the power away. There is Bluetooth if you need that, but disabled, which it is by default. it's not really going to do that much. The screen times out very quickly, so that preserves some battery life. This is all pretty classic stuff for a feature phone. Now, if you are a really, really heavy mobile chatterbug, it's only rated for up to 9.8 hours of calls. My voice is not up to talking for 9.8 hours, but maybe yours is. But that's still a pretty decent figure. You won't need to recharge it all that often. One point of annoyance here with that recharging story is that while it's USB-C, and I do like that, I kind of got annoyed with the 2660 Flip because it was micro USB, and USB-C is easier to put in and easier to put out and compatible with so many other chargers that you're likely to find out there. All you get in the box with the 3210 is a USB-C cable, no wall charger. So if you don't have one already, you're going to have to buy one on top of the 3210. So should you buy the Nokia 3210? Well, look, is this the right phone for me personally? No. No, not at all. Doesn't meet my needs at all, but it would be ridiculous for me to say, well, this is a bad phone because it doesn't meet my needs. My needs are kind of specific, and this is a phone that targets people with a couple of very specific sets of needs. Now, if you're a basic phone user, you just want a basic phone that's a phone, yeah, this will do the trick just fine. The calling is reasonable. The battery life is pretty good. The build quality maybe leaves a little to be desired, and those buttons aren't huge, but overall, this is perfectly decent as a feature phone, and here in Australia, you don't have that many feature phone choices to make. If you're after a digital detox device, look, there, I'm a little bit less convinced. Why am I less convinced? Well, primarily because the few functions it does have are really quite annoying to use. And yeah, that stops you from using them all that much, I get that. But dangling them in front of the user, dangling the internet or Facebook in front of the user, if you're talking about detox, it's rather like having a junkie and saying, right, well, here's this big bag of heroin, but you can't actually get into it because it's sealed in an impenetrable bag. That's not helping with the detox. That's more taunting them to remind them of why they're addicted in the first place, isn't it? Anyway, that's my take on the Nokia 3210. What do you think? Got any questions? Hit me up in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.